Hey everybody, welcome back. As you probably know, this is our final session together. So I want to pause and say thank you for inviting me into your group. And more importantly, thank you for setting aside some time to talk about one of the most important topics you can talk about, and that is decision making. Now, as we've reiterated through our time together, life is all about decision making, and your decisions determine the direction and quality of your life. And as we've said throughout our sessions together, good decisions require good questions. And of course, we're saying 5 in particular. And in this session, we're going to unpack our final question, the relationship question. By now, it should be clear that the thing that makes these questions clarifying also has the potential to make them a bit terrifying. And I say terrifying because, well, we usually know the answers to these questions before we even finish asking the questions, right? And once we know, we can't unknow. And once we know, we feel accountable. Now, our 5th and final question may be the most clarifying and thus the most terrifying question of all. This will probably be the question you're most tempted not to ask and not to answer honestly. So once again, a disclaimer, you don't have to do anything with your answer, but you owe it to yourself to know the answer, right? What you won't know can hurt you. And in the case of our final question, what you don't know or refuse to know has the potential to hurt you, or you have the potential to hurt the most in your most cherished relationships. Now, when you think about your future, you don't envision yourself alone, right? I mean, when you think about your future, there's somebody beside you. And perhaps that somebody is already beside you. Our final question will help you keep them there. In fact, this question has the potential to enhance the quality of every single one of your relationships. It has the power to restore and heal broken relationships. It has the power to rekindle romance, to restore what was lost. But before the big reveal, another disclaimer. Unlike our other 4 questions, this question does not come with a guaranteed ROI, return on investment. There may be no tangible, measurable, or even noticeable returns with this one. And the reason is this. Our final question is not about making your life better. It's about making someone else's life better, which may make your life better. But, and this is the payoff, our final question positions you to make the world better. So, here we go. Throughout Jesus' ministry, he hinted that something new was on the horizon, something designed to replace much of what was in place in first century Judaism. And all of his hints, his parables, his insinuations were designed to create a sense of expectation in the minds and the hearts of his first century followers. So when he entered Jerusalem for his final visit and what would be his final Passover meal, crowds lined the streets to welcome him. Their expectations were political, regal, messianic. They knew something was up, and he had their undivided attention, but they did not understand his ultimate intention. So on the night of his arrest, he gathers with his 12 apostles for what would be a final Passover meal, and he made his intentions clear, crystal clear. To begin with, he announced that he was leaving, and that was a downer and was confusing. I mean, why would he leave now? They were on the cusp of a revolution, right? I mean, the kingdom of Israel was about to be restored. And then he laid it out. He said this, "A new command I give you." A new command, they must have thought. I mean, we don't need any new commands. We already have 600 plus commands. And why was he talking about new commands? We need to make plans, right? Besides, what gave Jesus the right to add any new commandments? Only God had the authority to do that. But then again, only God had the authority to forgive sin. So they had seen Jesus step into this uncomfortable role on multiple occasions. So perhaps they were quiet. Anyway, as it turned out, Jesus wasn't even adding a new command to an existing list of commands. He was actually replacing the existing list with one single command. He continued and he said this, "A new command I give you," and here it is, "love one another." Now, that wasn't really all that new, but Jesus wasn't really all that through. He wasn't commanding them to feel something. He was commanding them to do something. And what came next, well, it was unthinkable. But what came next changed the world. And what came next has the potential to change your world. What Jesus said next is the basis for our 5th and final question. What came next trumped the golden rule. I like to call it the platinum rule. Here's what he said. "As I have loved you, so you must love one another. As I have loved you," he defines it, "so you must love one another." That was new. Apparently, doing for others what one hoped others would do for them in return was so last century. Jesus tells his followers they are to do unto others as he had done unto them. Now, this was extraordinarily personal for the men seated around the table that night. I mean, when us modern Christians read, "As I have loved you," we immediately think of the cross, but they didn't. They thought back over the previous 3 years. Perhaps each man in the room was transported back to some particular moment in time where Jesus had loved him particularly well. I mean, he could have worked his way around the room, right? I mean, one by one, he could have said to each of those 12 men, "Love as I have loved you. Extend to everyone you meet the same grace and the same forgiveness I extended personally to you." And he could have added this, "And gentlemen, if you think you've seen me love, tighten your sandals. You ain't seen nothing yet." Little did they know that on the following day, he would put on a demonstration of love that would take their breath away. Because the following day, he would give his life away. He continued, "By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." Now, here's the thing, and this is so easy for us to miss. This new command brand of love was to serve as the unifying and defining characteristic for his new movement, the church. His new command was to serve as the governing ethic, the standard against which all of their behavior was to be measured. They were to love as he had loved. They were to love as he would love, which means this, that following Jesus would not be about looking for ways to get closer to a God who dwelled out there or up there somewhere. Jesus followers would demonstrate their devotion to God by putting the person next to them in front of them. Jesus followers wouldn't authenticate their love for God by looking up. They would authenticate their devotion to God by looking around, by loving the people around them. And in an unprecedented move for a religious figure, Jesus didn't leverage his equality with God or even his messianic authority to stir his followers to action. He leveraged his love. In other words, Jesus didn't anchor his new command to his divine right as king. He anchored it to his own personal sacrificial love. Why would his disciples obey this new command? Why would they obey his command to love? Because he first loved them. They were to do unto others as Jesus had already done and was about to do unto them. Hours later, again, Jesus would stage a demonstration of love that not only took their breath away, it took their excuses away as well, along with ours. Think about it. A new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. Jesus' all-encompassing command was far less complicated than the current system, but it would turn out to be far more demanding as well. There would be no loopholes, no workarounds in this new brand of love. And that brings us at last to our final question, the relationship question. The question that honestly paves the path to relational health. The question that lays a foundation for mutually beneficial relationships. It's a question that brings inescapable clarity to just about every relational decision you'll ever bump up against. Our final question actually takes us to the heart of Jesus' new covenant command. Question number 5 is this: what does love require of me? What does love require of me? This clarifying and, yes, at times terrifying question should stand guard over our consciences. It should serve as the guide, the signpost, a compass as we navigate the unavoidable complexities of relationship. It should inform how we date, how we parent, how we boss, how we manage, how we coach. It should form a perimeter around what we say and do in our roles as spouse, coworker, and neighbor. This question, think about it, this question gives voice to God's will for us on issues where the Bible is silent. It succeeds where concordances and commentaries fail. If you're a Christian, it crushes that insipid justification we're so prone to make. Well, the Bible doesn't say there's anything wrong with fill in the blank. This question closes all those loopholes. It exposes our hypocrisy. It stands as judge and jury. It's so simple, but it is inescapably demanding. Our final question intersects with every imaginable relationship scenario you'll ever face. We're all tempted at times to ask or wonder how little we can get by with relationally, right? The very thing we don't want the person on the other side of us to consider. This question calls us all to account. When unsure of what to say or do, ask what love requires of you. When unsure of what to say or do, simply ask what love requires of you. You don't need chapter and verse. You have something better. Namely, Jesus knew, all-encompassing, inescapably simple command. We are to do unto others as our Heavenly Father through Christ has done unto us. Now, I imagine you're smart enough to know what love requires of you most of the time, but just in case, if love one another is not specific enough, the New Testament is actually full of real-world applications of what Jesus' new command brand of love looks like in the real world. In fact, the authors of the New Testament didn't add to Jesus' new command. They simply told us how to apply it. And the Apostle Paul provides us with the clearest applications. In his letter to Christians living in the Roman province of Galatia, we call it the book of Galatians, he actually insists that when it comes to relationships, here's what love requires. It requires kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. That's what love looks like in the real world. When in doubt, max those out. The interesting thing is that was Paul's short list. His most detailed description of what love looks like and acts like is actually found in his first letter to Christians who lived in Corinth. Now, this list is so familiar, I'm not sure it creates so much as a ripple in the consciences of most modern readers. And that is so unfortunate because this is the gold standard. According to Paul, what does love require of us? Paul says, here's what love requires of us. Love is patient. It's not pushy. Love requires that I move at your pace rather than demanding or requiring that you move at mine. He says love is kind. What is kindness? Kindness is love's response to weakness. Kindness is the choice to loan others our strength rather than reminding them of their weakness. It's doing for others what they cannot in that moment do for themselves. What does love require of us? He says, it does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. Love is humble. Love requires us to keep envy and pride from interfering with our ability to celebrate the success of other people. Love allows others to shine. What does love require of us? He says it does not dishonor others. Love requires us to show honor to others. Love never treats another person dishonorably. Love never treats another person disgracefully. Love never treats another person indecently. Love doesn't create regret. Think about it. Honor. Honor is at the heart of every satisfying relationship. Then he says this, it is not self-seeking. In other words, love is not selfish. Love puts the interest and the needs of the other person first. Think about it. That alone, that one idea alone would solve most relationship problems, wouldn't it? Then he says this, love is not easily angered. In other words, love is not easily stirred up or provoked. Love absorbs. Love puts the other person's story ahead of our own. He says love keeps no record of wrongs. Love isn't a scorekeeper. Love conveniently forgets the bad, and love conveniently elevates the good. Come on, forgiving and pretending to forget, you know this. Forgiving and pretending to forget, it is your best bet. To do otherwise is a power play. Think about it. When someone holds your past over you, who's in the elevated position? Love is not about powering up. Love is about stepping down, like Jesus did. Love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices in what's true. In other words, love doesn't enjoy catching the other person doing the wrong thing. Again, love celebrates when they get it right. And then he concludes with this big idea. He says, love always protects. In other words, love requires us to do everything in our power to protect or guard the relationship. Translated, love doesn't smuggle harmful things into a relationship, just the opposite. Love keeps harmful things out of the relationship. Love doesn't seek to win arguments. Love seeks to protect the relationship. Besides, come on, nobody ever wins an argument, especially when family's involved. I've seen too many parents win all the arguments and lose their kids in the process. Paul wraps up his list with this. Love always trusts. Always trusts. Love chooses a generous explanation when the other person doesn't meet our expectations. Love requires us to believe the best while choosing to downplay the rest. Love always hopes and love always perseveres. Now, that's quite a list, isn't it? But that's what love requires. And that's why our fifth question is not for the faint of heart. But consider this. Aren't the adjectives and verbs in Paul's list, aren't they the very thing you hope for or even expect from the people closest to you? Your spouse, your fiance, your parents, your kids. I mean, if these are the behaviors we consciously or even subconsciously expect from the folks around us, shouldn't they be required of us as well? So, what does love require of you? It may require you to pause this study, get up out of your chair, walk into the kitchen or the bedroom, and apologize. I'll wait. It may require you to pick up your phone and rebuild a bridge you burned down with your unassailable logic and your sarcasm. You were right, but being right wasn't what love required of you, was it? You may need to write a letter. You may need to rewrite an email. You may need to invite someone to coffee. And no, the other party may not be interested in what love requires of you. They may have no interest at all in what love requires of them either. But that's okay. Love requires that you just keep asking. So, with all of that as a backdrop, here's our fifth and our final decision, should you choose to decide it. Decision number 5, the relationship decision. I will decide with the interest of others in mind. I will decide with the interest of others in mind. Now, like you, my views on a variety of topics have evolved or really completely changed through the years. This includes my views on parenting, marriage, money, just to name a few. And one of the humbling things about being a pastor is that most of my views on just about everything, honestly, are documented somewhere on a hard drive. I mean, every preacher I know wishes they could go back and re-preach or unpreach or delete some old sermons. We meant well, but then life happened. Kids happened. Tragedy struck. We grew. We changed. But while our knowledge and beliefs are in flux, one thing is not. There is one thing that really transcends my limited knowledge and my limited insight and even my limited experience. And that one thing is love. Love fills the gaps. Love reduces the friction created by my limited insight and knowledge. I mean, there's so many things I don't know. There are things I'll never understand. But here's the thing. My ignorance and your ignorance, my ignorance does not impede my capacity to put other people first. So while I'm not always sure what to believe, I almost always know what love requires of me. And I bet you do too. So next time you find yourself driving home, having that imaginary conversation with your husband or your wife or your son or your daughter, next time you find yourself driving to work, having that imaginary conversation with your boss, that manager, that challenging employee, pause and ask yourself this question. What does love require of me? Because after all, good questions, they lead to better decisions, and your decisions determine the direction and the quality of your life. In our study, we've learned so much together, and I just want to pull it all together as we wrap up our time together. Your decisions serve as the framework. Remember this, your decisions serve as the framework for the story of your life. So I want you to write a good one. And while there's nothing you can do about the decisions you choose to go back and unmake or erase, remember this, your regrets are only part of your story. They don't have to be the story. Your past should remind you, but it does not have to define you. So incorporate our 5 questions into the rhythm of your life. Decide to tell yourself the truth, even when the truth makes you feel bad about yourself. Explore rather than ignore your conscience. Raise your standard of living from what's acceptable to what's wise. And do what love requires of you. Write a story you'll be proud to tell. A story distinguished by better decisions and fewer regrets. Again, thanks so much for inviting me into your group. I hope you'll invite me back sometime. Enjoy your discussion and happy decision making.